Hey there everyone, it's Dan from the Dan Cave, and in this build I'm building the Airfix 48 scale Supermarine Spitfire F Mark 18, and that's going to be done in one of the box schemes with some wonderful Mr. Colour paints which I got from UMP Retail. So as you can imagine, it's going to be the usual starting place for an aircraft kit. I'm going to start work on the cockpit, start getting some of those parts removed from the sprues, and get all those sprue attachment points cleaned up with the use of some UMP thinny sticks, which are absolutely perfect for all your cleanup needs. So once all those parts are cleaned up, it's a simple job of beginning to assemble some of those cockpit components. Now for this kit, the cockpit's going to be open, so I'm just scribing out the door, because under the cockpit there is a little door which folds down. There is a separate part in the kit supplied for this, but the side of the fuselage needs to be removed first. So that's removed and then cleaned up using a UMP thinny stick once again. So all the cockpit parts have been put together, kept reasonably in kind of complete assemblies or complete sub-assemblies, and then primed in UMP grey. And there is a separate video on the UMP primer as well. So once the primer is completely cured, it's time to give them a coat of interior green, which has come from the Mr. Colour range once again. So Mr. Colour lacquer paints have been thinned with Mr. Hobby leveling thinners, and then we're going to build up a couple of coats very, very slowly. Start off with a light coat first, gradually build up that colour depth, getting into all the angles. And these Mr. Hobby paints spray absolutely brilliantly. They're fantastic to work with. So as you can see, things like the cockpit seat, the rear bulkheads, the inside of the fuselage, that's sprayed in Super Metallic 212, which is matte aluminium, I believe. And then, of course, once all those paints are nicely dried, some of the details can be picked out using some acrylic paints and some very fine brushes. So there's a variety of dials and switches and interior details. Once the details have been picked out, I'm just going to dry brush on some silver paint, just to help pick out any of the kind of high points on any of those interior parts. So I'm going to give it a wash using some UMP Ultimate Washes, going with Dark Dirt, which is a water-based wash, over these acrylics and lacquer paints. Will be absolutely fine. Because it's got no clear coat, it won't flow very smoothly, so you need to basically just brush it on, brush it into all the recessed areas. And that will help add a little bit of detail and pick out all the recessed panel lines very, very nicely. So the UMP washes are very, very easy to use. They are water-based. They clean up with water absolutely fine. Brushes clean up with water. There's a lovely range of colours. I'll be honest, Dark Dirt is probably my absolute favourite. It's the one I go to most of the time for a nice dark wash. And of course, once it's dried, it's just using a cotton swab with some water just to clean up any of the excess. And you should be left with some very nicely highlighted panel lines and recessed areas given a little bit of depth, and just takes away that flatness which you get from just a plain paint colour, basically. So now that all the interior parts have been given their paint, their detail, their wash, you can assemble them together using a little bit of CA glue. Try not to get it on your fingers. And those parts fit together absolutely fine. The cockpit tub itself goes together. It's a little bit fiddly, but it does go together quite well. Airfix kits have drastically improved over the last 10 or 15 years. They're actually a pleasure to build these days. But it's my first time building this 48 Spitfire from Airfix, and I have to say, so far I'm really enjoying building it. So of course, once the cockpit is together, the fuselage halves can be put together. So they're securely glued together using some Mk.XVIII. Once that's fully cured, I'm going to use UMP thinny sticks just to clean up any nasty seam lines. And then very quickly we're into assembly of the major components of the aircraft, like the wings, the lower wings, the upper wings, using a combination of Tamiya glues. I quite like the white top for jobs like the wings because it doesn't evaporate very quickly like the extra thin does. Gives you a little bit of a slower curing time to work those parts together. And once again, for some of these smaller parts, just pop them in place and a little dab of Tamiya and they go together absolutely fine. So now it's time for priming of the overall airframe. UMP black primer is the choice, using my trusty UMP Apex, running at about 25 to 30 psi. I'm just going to lay down a couple of nice smooth coats, build it up slowly, working on the underside so far, and as you can see, after a couple of coats, that black colour goes down absolutely fine. It will dry to almost a semi-gloss finish. Once it's given a couple of hour drying time, I'm going to then go back, finish off the top side, and then of course it's time to move on to painting the airframe in matte aluminium. And you might wonder, why am I going for aluminium? Well, I'm going to do some chipping on this kit as well, so I'm going to lay down quite a light coat of aluminium, give a nice metallic base. That's pretty much going to go over the entire airframe because that gives me lots of flexibility as to what and where I'm going to do some chipping. Once that's fully cured, I'm going to go back in with some with some hairspray, some standard shop bought hairspray, decanted, sprayed through the airbrush. That's then left to cure. Once all that's fully cured, it's time to go back in with the base colours for this. So on the underside, it is Mr. Colour Medium Sea Grey. So all of this is thinned with Mr. Hobby levelling thinners and sprayed using my Harder & Steenbeck airbrush on this occasion. So again, just building up that grey colour, a couple of coats. And that lays down absolutely fine over the silver and over the aluminium and over the hairspray. So these Mr. Hobby paints are available over at UMP. So for the top side, I'm going to start on the Ocean Grey first. Again, from Mr. Colour. And slowly build up that grey colour. Nominally following the outline of where the camouflage will be. Obviously, because I'm starting with the grey, the important one is actually going to be on the green. I have masked off some of the underside just to prevent any nasty overspray. And there's still a desire, of course, to have, we'll say, the paint a little bit patchy in terms of depth of colour, because that adds to a little bit of the aging effect look of the paint. Obviously, you don't want the metallic colour showing through. And then, once again, once that's cured, it's back to freehanding the camouflage and filling in with the Mr. Colour paint once again, which is the dark green BS641. This time very carefully working the outline by hand. So this can easily be one of the most enjoyable parts of building a kit, getting these final base colours down, particularly having the freehand some camouflage. Using lacquers, of course, is an absolute joy to work with, and particularly the Mr. Colour ones. They're absolutely fantastic. So slowly filling it in, building up the opacity of that green, and work our way around the fuselage colours as well. A little bit trickier around these parts, but again, just patience is the key. And then once that's all fully cured, it's time to do some chipping. So a little bit of water on a brush, that will reactivate the hairspray that was used earlier on. And just using a stiff bristled brush with some water, you can begin to chip away at that paint. Cocktail stick can also be used just to make some scratches once you've wetted the surface. And that gives an absolutely lovely chipped effect. Now, once we're finished chipping, we have a little bit more detailed paint on the outside. The leading edges will be yellow on this. And then once I'm happy with all of that's going to get sealed in with a satin coat from Winsor & Newton Galleria's range of varnishes. So I've gone for a satin varnish. So now it's on to the decal stage. So I've got some warm water, pre-warmed, and I've got some UMP Fix, which is one of the newer products from UMP from their decal setting solution range. This one is essentially a solution that you add into your decal water, and it just helps break any of the surface tension with the water, helps soften the decals a little bit as well, and just starts that kind of first level of process of decal setting. So I've got some of these brushes. So they are basically quite a stiff bristled brush. You can fill the little tanks with your decal solutions if you wish. They're very, very useful for getting your decals to sit. And as you can see here, I'm using one of the brushes basically to use some of the decal water with the decal fix in it to wet the surface. And then I'm going to slide my RAF roundel in place. Now these decals from Airfix are absolutely spot on. They're from Cartograph. Fantastic decals to work with. And as you can see, that's been slid into place. I'm just going to use a cotton bud just to help remove any excess water. And that's before we apply any more decal solutions on top. So it's in the right place, just making sure it's pressed gently down onto the surface. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to use some UMP Normal, just to start the process of working with the solutions. That's been applied to the roundel and some of the decals that were applied earlier as well, just to make sure that they nicely adhere to the surface. Repeat the process on the opposite wing as well. Making sure to get that decal in exactly the right place. And we'll follow the same process, remove any excess. So now that's been sat for a while, I'm now going to apply some UMP Strong, particularly where any of the panel lines are, because we want the decal basically to get sucked into those panel lines. I can use a little bit of heat as well, just to help soften the decal. Works very well with the solutions. A little bit of application of heat, and as you can see, that's starting to suck into those panel lines. And that's just with the use of the UMP Normal and the UMP Strong. So as you can see, so far those decals have set in absolutely fine. Can now proceed on to adding the rest of the decals around the aircraft. Banding around the nose. We still have serial numbers, roundels on the side, roundels on the underside as well to add. That's a case of carefully manipulating some of these decals into place. Once again, using the solutions to help soften, using some heat. Those decals will go down absolutely spot on from Airfix. So again, make sure you refer to your instructions, make sure you get your placement correct, check for symmetry as well. You see all of that banding, the use of some UMP strong, just trying to make sure that those panel lines get sucked in. So once it's had a few hours drying time, sometimes I like to go back with a sharp scalpel blade just to slice along the panel lines. Again, this just makes sure that those decals are well and truly into those panel lines. And once I've sliced along those panel lines, I'm going to use some UMP strong once again, just to help soften those areas, and they will sit down even further into the panel lines and basically make the decals look like they've been painted on. So on the underside, on some of the clear parts of the decal film, we've had a little bit of silvering just where the decal hasn't quite adhered to the surface. So I'm using a little bit of UMP extra strong just to help blend in those clear decal areas. And as you can see, that's done the trick, and those decals have become almost invisible. Now they have a slight sheen difference because they're slightly glossier than the paint, but that's fine. That'll go once we've got some weathering down anyway. And as you can see, those decals are absolutely snug fit to the surface. UMP decal solutions for a win once again. So once the decals are completely cured, giving the kit a complete coat of Alclad Aquagloss, which is a gloss varnish. That'll make a nice base for the weathering, which will be the next phase of this build. So a couple of coats of Aquagloss with a nice shiny gloss finish. I'm going to use some UMP water-based washes again. I've got some dark dirt, some earth. And for the main panel line wash on the upper surface, I'm going back to my go-to, which is the dark dirt. So because it's got a gloss finish, it will flow a lot better. The capillary action will pull the wash into a lot of the panel lines. But because it's water-based, you don't have to be neat. You can just paint it onto all those panel lines, as you've seen. Make as much of a mess as you want, because we're just going to clean it up in the next phase anyway, to give us the desired look for all that panel shading. So I'm just using a long liner brush. I find they're a good way to apply with some accuracy. So slightly damp towel and kitchen roll, whatever you prefer, and then it's a case of clean up any of the excess. Tend to go in the airflow direction, because if you don't completely remove the wash, we want it to look streaked in the airflow, and that adds to the effect. We can clean up in a little bit more detail using a cotton bud. A little bit of moisture on it as well. That just helps be a little bit more precise in the areas we want completely cleaned up versus the areas we want to leave plenty of staining and streaking from the wash. So along the fuselage, same thing, using a towel just to wipe off any excess. So as I said earlier, it's absolutely easy to work with these washes. There's no smell, there's no harsh chemicals. So on the underside, same process again. So ultimately, once we're completely finished with our washes, it's time to add some pigments. So using some UMP pigments, starting off with the exhaust staining, and that's using a combination of UMP's black pigment and some of the ash pigment as well, which is a almost white colour. So start off with the black, just to give a broad outline of the, say, the exhaust staining from the engine. So that gives the, I suppose, the overall shape of the exhaust. Black is sometimes too stark on its own, so I'm going to use some of the ash as well, which is almost a white, very, very light grey colour. Mixing that in with the black areas gives a little bit of kind of grey variation. which matches more of what you would see from a heat staining effect from an exhaust on this type of aircraft. So you can also add some streaking from the guns as well, from the discharge from the weapons. Again, that's just using some of the black pigment, using a very small stiff brush, just to add a little bit of staining effect. And we can repeat that on the underside as well. And of course, on the underside there's a little bit more contrast because of the lighter grey, so it's a little bit more obvious where those exhaust stains have gone. So on the underside, I'm also using some dirt and sandy earth. That again introduces those brown tones, which adds a little bit more to that kind of wear and tear look for the underside. So once again, as you can see, it's so simple to use these pigments. You're essentially just brushing them on and then essentially just brushing them back off again, but again to leave that little bit of a stained effect. And on the wing root on the upper side, also using some sandy earth just to show those areas where flight crew, ground crew would walk with muddy boots, and just add that extra little bit of visual contrast. A few other areas also get a little bit more brown tones. Again, that just breaks up the kind of visual look of it, adds a little bit more of a grimy look to the aircraft. Well used and well worn. So then it's a case of adding all the final touches, things like the underwing rockets, landing gear of course have been added. And with all those parts added, this kit is pretty much done and dusted. So let's head on over and look at the final photos. So wonderful Airfix kit, available from UMP. Lots of the products used in this build are all available from UMP. So big thanks to Lee for supplying some of those. And I'll see you very, very soon.